we establish a kind of marriage where we can confess to one another, and forsake our sin, not just confess it, but confess and turn away from it. I do believe that we're intended to find mercy, to give mercy. Our marriages ought to be marked by mercy. And so that allows us to confess to one another rather than keeping it and hiding it.
Hey, Scott, welcome to the happy hour.
Hey, thank you. So good to be here with you, Jamie.
I'm so excited to have you. Another Harris Creek guy. You work with JP. JP's been on the show today. I think I should just start checking off your staff directory and see who else we can get on the happy hour, if that's what's happening here. But I'm really happy that you're here. Introduce yourself to my listener and tell everyone who you are.
Yeah, so my name's Scott Kedersha. I am married to Kristen. We've been married 22 years. I think similar to you, Jamie, right? Weren't you?
Yeah, 2001? We're 2001. When's your anniversary?
We're September 15th, so we got married the week of 9/11.
Yeah, you did.
That was a Tuesday. We got married a couple days after that.
That just gave me chills for some reason. June. And so we actually honeymooned in New York City just a couple months before 9/11. And so it just still feels like a lot. But yeah, 2011.
Wow. Yeah. So yeah, we got married 4 days after 9/11, 22 years, 4 boys, twins who are 19, a 16-year-old, 14-year-old, and I get to do marriage ministry. I've done that for 17 years now. I was at Watermark Community Church in Dallas for a long time and thought we would die and I'd retire and all that in Dallas. And it was just time for a change. And so we moved down to Waco. I get to serve marriages here at Harris Creek with JP, Maddie Trout, who was on a few weeks ago, get to serve with her and her husband. And so we love being here at Harris Creek and in Waco, the home of the Bears.
The home of the Bears. Listen, I've said it publicly before. I will cheer for the Bears all day long, as long as they're not playing my Longhorns.
I appreciate that. And you guys took care of us this year pretty well, if I remember right. I was glad I was out of town for that game and didn't have to watch that.
We did take care of you, but I will say you guys turned around and went to UCF and took care of them.
You know your stuff. We did, and then Tech took care of us.
Tech took care of y'all. I love my friends at Baylor and stuff, but I think you guys might just get taken care of a lot this year.
It's gonna be a long year.
It's a long
year.
And
I don't have the same affection for UT like you do for Baylor, but I was sad that OU won. I was definitely cheering for the Longhorns, which doesn't make me popular around here, but I just don't like
I will
OU.
take that. I will take that. Thank you. It was a sad day. Like after the game was over, I just took a nap outside. Like I was just like, I need to lay down. I need to rest. I need to rest my whole body. It was sad.
But you guys, I mean, this could be a championship year. It's okay. You can recover. It's not over yet.
Say it here. We're going to see those Sooners back again in December. That's what I'm claiming. Scott, I love that you like football. And I've been telling people about this new podcast. I just started listening to this podcast this year, the Solid Verbal podcast. Have you been a longtime listener?
No, I heard about it from you, and I'm kind of mad at you for it because I don't need any more podcasts to listen to. And then you posted about it. I thought it was a cool name, didn't know what it was about, and then I have been hooked ever since. It's so good. I love listening to him.
I love listening to it as well. I will admit, sometimes I kind of fast forward and get to like if they're talking about the Big 12 or any our Longhorns or whatever. I don't really care what's happening, in the Pac-10. Like, who cares, know? And so I do love it. Well, yeah, Scott, I'm really happy.
Big 10 is dead to me.
Big 10 is dead to us all.
Yes.
I'm happy that you're here, and I have a feeling that our conversation is going to go here and there and wherever it leads us. And those are probably my favorite kind of conversations, especially on the happy hour. But you just released a book in October called The Ready or Not Prayer Guide, and it's 100 prayers for dating and engaged couples. And when I think about marriage ministry and marriage, it's important to Aaron and I. Like I said, we've been married same amount of years as you and Kristen, and marriage. It's hard. I always tell the story a lot. When Aaron and I first got married, we were probably been married a handful of years, and one of his friends from college called him to tell him that his parents were getting a divorce. And I remember as a newlywed thinking, wait, you put that much time into this and now you're getting a divorce? Like I didn't have any space for it in my brain. Like it didn't make sense to me. I didn't understand it. I was very sad with them and about it. But I couldn't understand it. And now, like, unfortunately, after being married for 21 years, I understand how that happens. Like, I understand how people play on your podcast that you host, which you can tell us about later, become like roommates and they just kind of function together. And I always think about that story and think about how that kind of put a fire in my spirit to make sure that Aaron and I did not become like roommates. But I think it's hard. Parenting and work and life and all of the things, it's just really easy. So, talk to us a little bit about what you've seen recently, maybe in your marriage ministry, what you're doing of like, what does it look like with marriages these days within the church? Are we becoming more like roommates? Are we thriving? Like, just tell us. Well, we want some good news, Scott. Tell
All
us
the
some good news
stuff,
too.
yeah. Well, there is a lot of good news, but start off with the bad. It is really tough, right? I've heard Paul Tripp say this before, that marriage is a one sinner married to another sinner in a broken world.
Yep.
And apart from Jesus, there's not a lot of hope there. And
Mm,
so if a husband is a sinner and a wife is a sinner, and we've got to function and work this thing out in a broken world, and we make broken kids and we have broken jobs, it makes for a really tough combination. Like people always say before they get married, are we compatible with each other? And my answer is always no, because none of us, it's kind of
mm,
sad, none of us are compatible because we're both sinners.
mm-hmm,
And so apart from Jesus, this thing is hopeless. And so it's
mm,
no wonder why the divorce rate is what it is inside the church and outside the church. It's no wonder why, maybe couples aren't getting divorced, but they're just miserable together. They
mm,
are just roommates, and I don't like the way that we talk about marriage, that it's a burden, that it's so difficult all the time, that, the old ball and chain, the old lady, like the way that we talk about each other is not honoring to this incredible gift that
mm,
marriage is. And
mm.
I would say, for me and Kristen, it is, apart from my relationship with Jesus, it is the second greatest gift in my life.
Yeah.
Like, she's amazing. And I get to see, the gospel lived out in our relationship. We get to see redemption and forgiveness and hope, and it's a whole lot of fun. And God
Mm,
designed it in a way that really is incredible, of just getting to be intimate with each other, of having a companion, a best friend. I'm so much better because of her. And I
yeah.
think when couples live this thing out right, when they deal with their selfishness, deal with their sin, kind of work on themselves instead of focusing on all the problems of their spouse, we can actually live this thing out with a lot of hope and joy and encouragement and the blessing that it's intended to be.
Scott, I feel the same way about my spouse as you do about yours. And I just like it sounds as cheesy as it is can ever be. And I know that it's cheesy and I know that people are gonna want to throw up in their cars. Like I get it. I make myself want to throw up. That Aaron truly is my best friend and he's truly who I would want to spend. If you get to get stuck on an island with anybody, I choose Aaron all day. And so I am very, very, very grateful for the marriage that God has given us. And marriage has not been the hardest thing for me. Like parenting is the hardest thing for me in my life. And
Preach.
so
Come on.
marriage has not been the hardest thing for me, but I do know that marriage can be so difficult. And I do think that it is also so beautiful. It is a gift. And I'm going to say this at the beginning, neither Scott nor I believe that marriage is the ultimate thing, the best thing, the
Right.
better thing. We believe that it is a gift that God has given to some people within the church, the world, and singleness is just as good. We're just going to put that out there, but we're going to talk about marriage.
That's right.
You
Great.
agree with that. Scott, just recently Aaron had COVID and it
Mm.
was worse, it's 2023. COVID is not gone by any means, but it doesn't do what it did in 2020 when like you're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm spraying Lysol all around you and all the things." But he
Yeah.
was stuck in the room for a while and I slept in another room. Life went on when Aaron Ivey was stuck in the bed with COVID. I was sleeping
Yeah.
someplace else. I was still dealing with children's stuff. And at the end of the week, I literally said to him, I feel very disconnected from you. I feel like
Mm.
roommates. Like I'm just coming up here to ask you, like tackle some things, and then I go sleep in a different room. And so that's an extreme example, obviously. But what is some hope for marriages these days? Like if someone is coming to you and they feel like they're in this rut, maybe they're not sleeping in another room, maybe other things, but they do feel like we have lost a little bit of our connection. And you and I both being married for 2 decades understand how that happens. What is your
Yeah.
counsel to people on how to get some of that back?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I certainly, first of all, I mean, I certainly get the being divided during COVID. I remember a time a couple of years ago. This is the biggest challenge we faced in our marriage in the last couple of years, is when my wife had COVID and all my kids had COVID and I didn't. And
Oh,
I'm
Scott,
just
you were in charge of the whole house,
the whole
the
house.
health
Thank you
of
for
all the
understanding.
people.
Yes. And I still got to work my job and take care of the family, and I'm just going to be vulnerable. I kind of felt entitled during those few days,
Mhm.
and one night I'm sleeping in the guest room. Everyone else is upstairs. All they're doing is watching movies and having fun, and I'm doing everything. And I pulled my phone out one night and looked at porn,
Mm,
and did something I hadn't done in a while. And I remember just in that, just you even sharing about Aaron having it just brought that back to me immediately,
Mm,
and how much I broke oneness in our relationship when I did that. And I think what one of the challenges is that so often, whether it's that story or, you and Aaron not being able to be next to each other and with each other for a few days when he had it, is like we just fall into this rut where we just pursue and do what we want to do,
mm,
where it's selfishness comes out and we're pursuing our own desires and what we want. And I think that's the big problem. It's James 4:1. Why do quarrels and quarrels exist among us? Why do we fight? Why do we quarrel? It's because of selfish desires that wage war within us. And I just think if we would be people who would attack that selfishness, like if I had thought of my wife in that moment instead of
mm,
thinking about what I wanted and what I desired and what I felt entitled to, like what if I had thought about her and my family? If I
mhm,
had just said, "Hey, this is not worth it. It's worth pursuing Jesus and pursuing my wife."
mhm,
And so often we just do what we want to do because we're selfish. It's what's tearing marriages apart. It's what's
mm,
leading to divorce. It's what leads to even being still married, but just kind of coexisting with each other.
mhm,
And God has so much more for us. And you're right, it is not ultimate.
mhm,
But the problem is we just do what we want to do and we
mhm,
pursue our own selfish desires instead of this incredible privilege of getting to joyfully serve one another,
mm.
which again sounds like impossible and cheesy, but that's what Jesus did for
Yeah.
us, right? And
Yeah.
that's what marriage is this picture of. It's this picture of God's love for us, his love for the church, and we get to do the same thing within marriage. And that's why I think it's so beautiful, is because we get to, in the process of being married well, we get to be like Christ.
It's interesting because we live in a world that really tells us in lots of areas, not just marriage, hey, if you're not happy, go do whatever you need to do to get happy. And that message is blaring at us, and I remember we're just going to talk about all of our stuff during COVID. During COVID, 2020 and 2021 were our hardest years of marriage yet.
Mm,
2010 was hard circumstantially, but 2020 and 2021 between Aaron and I was so difficult. And I
yeah.
remember one time I was talking to my counselor and I was just telling her like all the things that I thought Aaron was failing at. And she didn't tell me that he wasn't failing at them. She didn't say like, "Oh, I'm sure he's doing great." Like she didn't do that. But she did say, "What can you work on yourself? Like
Mm,
what can Jamie do in the situation?" And I wasn't frustrated with her by any means. She was right. But all I wanted to do was point out every way that Aaron was failing.
right.
And for a split second, I was like, "See, I deserve him to be better. Like, come on, Aaron Ivey, get your stuff together." And she really encouraged me, like, "What can you do?" And I think, Scott, that's what you're saying is that this selfish mentality. And this conversation feels a little difficult because you do this all the time.
Yeah.
But oftentimes you're looking at couples who are really unhappy. Like you're not happy.
Yeah.
Like this is not a matter of maybe we're misunderstanding. No, I'm not happy. And then you're asking them, lay down your life for someone
Mm,
else.
mhm.
How do we do that? That feels it's anti-flesh. And I know the answer, but how do we do that?
Yeah, I think it's so I read this like 5 years into marriage, I read this and it kind of blew my mind and changed my mentality on marriage. And so it's 1 Timothy 1:15 when Paul is writing to Timothy and he says, "I am the chief sinner." Right? And so it's not a marriage verse. That passage has nothing to do with marriage, but
Mm,
I remember reading that and it was in a book called When Sinners Say I Do, which is a great title, but it's kind of like this really heavy view of marriage and how the gospel plays out. It's by a guy named Dave Harvey. And I remember reading that, and he writes about just that mentality. When you see yourself as the biggest problem in your marriage, it can change your marriage.
wow.
Because instead of looking at your spouse and saying you're the problem that needs to be fixed, which we can't do anything about, right?
Hmm.
There's nothing that I can do to fix
Gosh, we
Kristen's stuff,
try. Oh.
right? Yes. And I'm going to tell people, I'm going to pray that God would do it. And like, God, fix them, fix
Hmm.
Kristen. And I can't do that. There's nothing I could do. But if I see myself as the biggest problem in my marriage,
Mm,
which and I'm like, there are times when I when I just like stack the sin, and I go, she's probably 51% responsible, and I'm 49%, which is so stupid. But that's what we do is like we
mhm,
compare who's got more, and this mentality, and I've seen it change. Not just my marriage, but so many marriages, is to see yourself as the biggest problem in your marriage. And you're going to do everything you can. This phrase that I got at Watermark was, draw a circle around yourself and work on everyone inside the circle. And so that's what I could do. That's what you can do as you listen to this, is to say, I know that my spouse has stuff. And I'm going to ask, the Holy Spirit, I'm going to ask God's people to work on them, but I can change myself. I can change my mentality. I can change my behaviors. I can change the way I pray. I can become more and more and more like Christ. I'm going to do everything I can to become like Christ. And I'm going to just trust that God is going to do his thing
Mm.
in my spouse in a way that I never can. And that's a freeing perspective because it
Yeah.
no longer means that I've got to fix them. It means I can take care of what I bring to the table. And I just believe that if I do that, I'm going to trust that God's going to do the same thing in my spouse.
It's so good. I think there's been a handful of times in my marriage, particularly, where I've had to say, not so much in like changing Aaron's like something he's doing wrong or whatever, but bringing us unified, where I've had to say, like, God, bring us together or like make us change our mind. Like, you have to bring us together somehow because we're not doing this. And I think that prayer for our spouse
Yes.
is so very important. And it's often the thing that we're like, I can't even, I just need them to be better. I just need them to do better. And we forget how important it is to ask God to do that. Now, you're talking about saying I'm the chief centers, which is why I love Paul. He says it all the time. He's like, hey,
All the
here I
time.
am. I'm
Yes.
the worst. Okay. Everyone follow me. Um, but I think that mentality, it comes with a lot of humility. It comes
Mm,
with a lot of meekness, a lot of gentleness. Frankly, besides being the chief center, it looks a lot like Jesus, and
yeah.
and laying down our lives for each other and serving each other. Aaron and I decided early on, like one of our goals in our marriage is like who can outserve the other, and not
I
like we're
love
keeping
that.
tallies, not like we have a chart in our house. On my worst days, I can create a chart in my head of who has done the most for each other.
Yes.
Yeah, and usually I'm winning. I'll just tell you that much. Um, but really, like, how do we do that? Like, how do we serve each other? And what I found, Scott, is that when I am seeking out to do the best for my husband, it changes me. Like,
Mhm.
it changes
Mhm.
something inside of me. And this book that you have, Ready or Not, a prayer guide for dating or engaged couples, you have a marriage ministry. And so this book is for people who are not yet married.
Right.
And you probably talk to a lot of people who are on the verge of getting married. And this is what I was going to tell you earlier. This is a rabbit trail. You said
Yeah.
when you ask people, am I compatible? You know what I was
Right.
thinking? I heard someone one time say, and I don't remember who it was, but they said they've married like 5 different people and it's been the same
Uh-huh.
person.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? Like, how different are you and your wife today than you were in 2001?
Oh man, so different. Yes. I hope, right? I hope after
Right.
22
Right.
years I'm really different.
I hope
Yes.
so.
And
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
with her.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Aaron and I are so different as well. So when you talk to engaged people or dating people, what are some of the biggest advice that you give to them as they're looking towards marriage?
Yeah, well, I mean, here's why I wrote this book is because we consistently like here's the advice I just had this conversation a couple days ago with some newlyweds. They're like, what's the one thing you would do? And I go, well, here's three things. One is I would work on myself. I would address my sin struggles, right? As quickly as I can. I'm going to work on my baggage that will help me be a better spouse down the road. Second is I'm going to make sure that we're consistently involved in the lives of other couples, that we're like never isolate, we never live life apart. And then the third one, and this is by far the most important one I tell them, is you've got to begin this pattern of praying together. And here's why. One is research consistently shows that if there's one thing that we can do for our marriage that will dramatically and like it's ridiculous the numbers that if a couple prays together out loud on a consistent basis, the divorce rate is significantly less than 1%. And so, research is showing all kinds of things, 30%, 40%, 50% divorce rate, whatever it is. But if there's something I could do that reduces the divorce rate to less than 1%, why would I not do that thing?
Mhm. Mhm.
And then I look at, our marriage and I hate to admit this, and I've been, marriage pastor for a long time, and I'm always encouraging couples to pray together. That's what I'm supposed to do. But we weren't really doing that at home. Like we would get on fits and starts, we'd go for a little while, then we'd stop. And I just didn't see the importance of it, if I'm honest. And it was one of those like, hey, do as I say, not as I do. And when I read that study, I'm like, there's got to be something to this.
Mm.
And we need to start praying for a marriage. Even though we had a great marriage, I go, man, well, I think we're missing out on something. Like if it's a 8 out of 10, I think we can get to a 10 out of 10.
Mm.
And the reason we're not there is because we're not pursuing the Lord together in prayer. And so we've started this pattern of praying together, and it's really changed our marriage. And we, like I said, we were in a great spot, but we are having so much fun together now. I feel like I know Kristen at a different level. And I'm like, I wish I had done this 20 years ago.
Mm.
And so that's where this book comes from is I want couples to start this pattern of praying for their relationship really from the beginning.
Mm,
You know, and there's not, the Bible doesn't say a lot about marriage, and so it's not like this deep Bible study on marriage. It's really, let's look at who Jesus is. Let's look at characteristics of Christ, and let's pray that those things would be part of my life, part of my spouse's life. They would mark our marriage, and so that's what I want couples to do, is not pray for a great marriage, but ultimately pray that each of us would become more like Christ, and that our marriage would be like a Christ-like marriage. And I think that would change our marriages in a really unique way, other than just doing a bunch of tips and tricks that are
mm.
probably gonna fall short anyway.
Mm, it's so good. And y'all, this book is already out, so you can get it wherever you want. Scott, I want to go back to you were vulnerable earlier with something that happened during COVID when you looked at pornography, when your
Yeah.
whole family was, upstairs, in your words, having the time of their life watching
Right.
movies,
Which they
all
really
with
weren't. They
COVID.
were they were all sick, yes.
Exactly, exactly. Um, but I want to talk about confession because I feel like that is
Mm,
also a thing that is hard in marriages. And I have had um, to confess things to Aaron that I would have rather just kept to myself,
yeah.
and my brain told me it would be okay to keep to myself, and it wouldn't do any harm. And can you talk to us about what that looked like and how that worked itself out in your own home?
Yeah, it's so hard, right? And I just don't wanna hurt my wife, right? I love her so much. We're one flesh with each other, and so confession is hard because we're either selfish and we worry too much about what other people think, or because we're afraid of hurting others. And I remember, Proverbs 28:13, whoever conceals their transgressions doesn't prosper, but
Mm,
the one who confesses and forsakes their sin finds mercy. And so it's really a test. Do we believe God's word when we fall short?
mm-hmm,
Because we're all going to sin. It's not
mm-hmm,
like we can strive to be perfect. Like, I want to become more and more and more like Christ, the longer I'm walking with him, but we're all going to fall short. And so let's not be surprised that we sin and that we struggle. And so I've got two choices in that. I can either pretend, and I get you get this in Austin and Texas and the Bible Belt where we are. People just pretend to have all their stuff together.
mm-hmm,
And it's like put on the pretty face when you go to church and get dressed up and everyone's fine and everyone's good. There's no problems, but like, let's be real, we all struggle. We're
mm-hmm,
all sinners. We all have stuff. And so why would we pretend not to?
mm,
And so even in marriage, to pretend that we don't have stuff really means that we're probably hiding. And I think some people probably you know, are holier, and so they have less to confess, but we're all going to have stuff to confess. And so
mm-hmm.
it makes it difficult. But if we establish a kind of marriage where we can confess to one another, and forsake our sin, not just confess it, but confess and turn away from it, I do believe that we're intended to find mercy, to give mercy. Our marriages ought to be marked by mercy. And so that allows us to confess to one another rather than keeping it and hiding it.
Mm. And that's a level of intimacy that we all yearn for, is
Yeah.
when you can confess your sin, in this particular case to a spouse, it could be to a friend, and that friend shows you mercy. That is a level of intimacy that people yearn for. And
Yeah.
that is what, we can have in our marriages. Scott, tell us about your podcast that you have as well, because I was listening to it on my way to work today.
Well, I am having it is my favorite thing in my life right now. Apart from Jesus, of course, and my kids and marriage, all that. But I have loved it, and thank you. You have been a huge help. Even though we've never met face to face, you and your team have been a huge encouragement
Mm,
for me
good.
to start this thing. And I've been thinking about it for years. And finally, we started the podcast in January of 2023. We were released 47 episodes or something
Way to
like that. I can't
go,
remember where we
guys.
are. Yep, and we are having the best time. And so I've got an amazing team, Gabrielle McCullough and Derek Davidson, and it's called More Than Roommates. And it's intended to help couples very proactively to become more than roommates with each other, that we
Mm,
would be intentional in growing our marriages.
mm,
And I've loved it. Like, it's forcing us to work on our own marriage. We're having really good, honest conversations, great interviews, and so it's all designed to help couples not just be stuck in a rut, but really to take whatever the next intentional step is that they can take to be more than roommates. And I love the title. I didn't come up with it. Gabrielle's husband Cooper came up with it, and so I'll give credit where credit is due. But we do want couples to be more than roommates.
I love that so much. Um, Scott, I want to switch gears just for a second and
Okay.
talk about something that I think this is a first for me to talk about on the show for sure. Also, side note, I don't know if you know this, I didn't start having men on this podcast till 2020.
Yes.
And so in 2014, so for all of those years, it was just women. And then 2020 years comes men. And I'm telling you, someone asked me the other day, like, are you glad that you made the change? And I'm like, yes, I've had so many amazing conversations with brothers in Christ who I just would have never had on. And my world would have been so very, very shallow, even though I'm like for women and love it and all the things. But I was going to say, this is the first conversation I've had with a man on my show before. And I just want to thank you ahead of time for your vulnerability here.
Sure.
You told me that one of the things that's been a big struggle in your life for the past couple of years has been health and wellness. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what that's looked like for you and how you're finding freedom in that.
Yeah. Yes. Well, it really has, I had problems with my tonsils when I was a young kid and couldn't eat and was skinny, and I had my tonsils out, and I joked unhealthfully at times, unhealthfully, whichever it is, that I got my tonsils out and never stopped eating since. And it's been weight and obesity and overeating have been it's really my thorn in the flesh. It's the thing that I struggle with more than anything else. And there's a long list of struggles. There's a lot that I've wrestled through in my life, but this is the one that's been the biggest thing. And it's like I'm addicted to food is
Mm,
the way I say it. And so I know we're intended to eat, to live, and food is a gift. And it's like I'm thankful God created us with this need and this desire. But for me, it's I just think about food all the time. What's my next meal? What do I get to eat next? It's almost like the same kind of rush that some people get from pornography, I get from eating food secretly. And
mhm,
so where it really became a problem, where I was willing to admit it, is I would go to the store, I would buy candy, I would shove it in my pockets or my bag, and I would go to wherever I was going, get behind a closed door and just binge. And sometimes it was like literally I'm sitting on a toilet seat
mhm,
with a closed door, nobody around, and I'm just feasting and binging on food. And then in that, like, my eyes were open to the secrecy and the hold this thing had on me. Of I get emotional because it was like this. It had such a hold on me and a grip on me that I couldn't get over.
mm,
And I finally had to start asking for help and admitting that it was a problem, and that I still needed to eat, but I couldn't look to food to satisfy me fully. And it was what I went to when I was happy. It's what I went to when I was sad, when I was isolated, when I was embarrassed. Food would be the thing that was always going to make things better for me. And so started to address it. I actually preached a message on it, in 2016 or 17. It might have been the first time in our church that somebody talked about food and eating from the stage. And that was really the beginning of the healing process for me. And I'm still not over it. I just got diagnosed with diabetes a few years ago. I inherited some bad genes, but the bigger problem is not my genes. It's my sin in it of overeating and looking for food to bring me life that it's never intended to give.
mm,
And so I am working my tail off. I've had a great year of addressing it, continuing to be honest and open about it. It's the healthiest I've been in a long time, and I have a long way to go, but I am finding so much freedom and hope and really just being open. I'm so glad you asked me about it because nobody wants to talk about it.
mhm,
And I want to talk about it all the time because I
mm.
think it's got such a stronghold on me, and a stronghold on so many, and it's something we just don't talk about.
I agree. It's something we don't talk about. I think it feels a little uncomfortable, like people don't know where to go or how to talk about or how. I mean, weight can be such a sensitive issue for people. Um, a lot of people, Scott would say, like this feels like this would be like a woman's issue, or
Right.
and for a man, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. Do you remember how you were the reaction of people around you when you first started talking about it?
Yeah, it was like, I can't believe somebody is finally talking about this.
Mm,
And we talk about eating disorders, and I'm sensitive to that for sure, that some are listening and they have a very different issue with this.
mm-hmm,
And I think we talk about that side of it. We don't talk about the unhealthy side of it when it comes to overeating and
mm,
binging and indulging in and it is uncommon for guys to talk about it. And I've heard
mm-hmm,
from so many who men and women just of appreciating that the topic is being discussed And even if they quote unquote look good on the outside, they realize that internally it's got a strong hold on them as
Mm,
well. I've got a great friend here at Harris Creek who, I mean, the dude's chiseled. I would do anything for his for his body type and his muscles. He's got great hair, good looking guy, all of that. And he struggles like he's a guy that I can talk to about this who gets everything I'm
mm,
going through, and he has the same thing. And maybe it doesn't look like it outwardly,
mhm,
but it's a heart condition, a heart issue
mm.
that that I'm so glad that we can at least talk about because we have to.
Yeah.
It's a sin struggle like anything else at times.
I was just thinking I was going to ask you, you do call it a sin struggle, and I can totally get behind that and hear that. That probably makes some people feel a little uncomfortable sometimes when you call, overindulging, binge eating, overeating a sin struggle. And I appreciate you saying that about eating disorders and disordered eating, this is real and all the things.
Yeah.
Um, how do you feel about calling? You feel pretty confident about it, but did it take you a while to acknowledge this as this might be sin in my life?
Man, it's such a good question, right? I think because we all need food to survive, God
Right.
created us that way. And he created pleasurable foods that are like
Mm-hmm.
amazing to look at and to eat and enjoy and to feast. And I believe we will feast in heaven. You know,
Mm-hmm.
all these things are right and true. But I think for so often, because it is the way that God designed us with a need to eat, that I almost belittled it. It's like, hey, at least I'm
Mm,
not cheating on my wife, or at least
right.
I haven't killed anyone, or I'm not
I'm
getting
not doing
high or getting
drugs. I'm not
drunk. Yes.
alcoholic. Yeah.
Yes, and so I minimized it. It was really this point of saying it's not a sin to eat. It's not even a sin to enjoy food. It's a sin when I think food is going to do something it was never intended to do. That food is not going to make my problems go away. It's not going to cure
Mm,
my isolation. It's not going to cure my embarrassment and my shame.
mm,
Food is something that we need to survive, and God has given it to us. But when I make it God, when I think about food more than I do him, when I think about
mm-hmm,
food more than I do my spouse, when I'm eating in a way that it's taking away from my vitality, when it's affecting the way I can lead and love my wife, and
mm-hmm,
the last thought I'd say is like I'm literally slowly killing myself in the way I looked at food.
mm,
And we're all going to die, like I'm 100% certain of that. We're all going to pass away, but I was prematurely ending my life because of all the health issues I was creating by overeating food. And I
mm,
know that's not everyone's story, but for me, the decisions I was making were leading me to significant health issues that are affecting everything in my life.
mm. It makes me think of, was it Tim Keller who said an idol is anything that is good that you make ultimate? And
Mm,
so, you said you were putting food above everything. And for all of us listening, like we could fill that blank in with anything.
yeah,
Sex is good, within a marriage space. And if you make that ultimate, it becomes an idol. If you
that's
think that
right.
like sex is going to cure my loneliness or sex is going to cure my fear or my attachment issues, sex is good and God created it to bring intimacy in a marriage. But it can't solve my attachment issues,
That's right.
and so, or anything, whether that be, we can fill in the blank with lots of stuff that we can use on them. Well, Scott, I appreciate you being vulnerable, and I love that you get to talk about it. And I'm gonna find that message from 2016 if you'll share it with me,
Yeah.
and then we'll
Yeah, for
link it
sure.
for people to be able to go listen and watch. Um, Really, really grateful, and I think that opens up the conversations for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Well, Scott, I want to finish with this. Let's talk about what we're reading
Okay.
because we're reading some of the same books, and I think it has some conversation starters here. So, what are you reading these days?
Yeah. Well, one, I want to share one. I don't know if you've heard of this one before, but I just finished this amazing
you're
set of 2 books
you're so
called
funny.
Compliment. I love it, it's so good. So I mean, you and Aaron did an amazing job. I love it, it was fun to read, a really unique angle. I read a ton of marriage books, but, I just finished it a few days ago, and I can't wait to continue to recommend it to so many
Scott, you're
people, so
so kind. Every time I talk to people about marriage or I get like a marriage book in, I always am like, I want everyone to know that when Aaron and I wrote the book Compliment, we do not see ourselves as marriage experts. Like we're not like, ooh, we have all the tips and tricks and follow us for how to get a great marriage. But we really just want it to be an encouragement. And so we believe in marriage as much as you do. So thank you. You're so kind.
well, you did a great job. I just finished Made for People by Justin Whitmel Early, an incredible book, and,
I had him on the show. In fact, the day we're recording, his show comes out today on the happy hour. And I read that book and I loved it so much. It was about covenant friendship, which is just a conversation that I don't think that we talk about friendship, we talk about community, but he took it deep. He took it to another level.
Yes. He's
I,
awesome. He's awesome. Great book.
he's really, really
And
great.
then, and I'm reading this book. It's called Embracing Obscurity by, have you heard of this? It's by the author's name is Anonymous.
Oh,
And so he,
embracing insecure. Wait, what? Say it.
Embracing Obscurity.
Obscurity by
Yeah.
Anonymous. Okay, okay,
Yeah.
I
And
see what they're
here's
doing
why I
here.
love it. Yes. It's like, we all think of like, I want to be well known. I want to promote my name. I want the bigger platform, all that stuff. And, reality, we look at Jesus. Jesus was entitled to everything, right? The most fame, the biggest following, and he chose to conceal his greatness in so many ways. He was the most humble, the perfection of humility. And so
Hmm.
it's been good for me to wake me up just to go, I don't need to chase all this stuff. I just really need to chase Jesus and become more and more like Christ.
I don't know why you talking about that book just made me think about it, but my friend Sharon Hody Miller told me about a book she read this summer that's on my list, and it's called "When Narcissism Comes to Church: Healing Your Community from Emotional and Spiritual Abuse" by Chuck DeGroat. Now, she read this, and I love my friend Sharon. She's a phenomenal pastor, a phenomenal leader, and she was like, "When I read this, it hit me between the eyes, and it should be required reading for all pastors." And so I was like,
Wow.
I need to read this. I'm not a pastor, but it just made me think like, wow. Have you read it or heard of it?
No, well, I've heard of it, and now I really want to read it. We have a residency here at Harris Creek, and we have all of our residents read it, and so it is required reading for our
Oh, see.
residents. I should probably read it myself. They're actually reading it right now as we
Jump in, Scott.
record.
It's not too late.
I know. Well, man, I know I'm narcissistic at times, and I love the church. And
Hmm.
if Sharon says it, and now you're saying it, I know you haven't read it yet, but I'm on it. I'm going to
I
read
trust
that.
Sharon. I trust Sharon. Okay, so I also know that you read Matthew Perry's book.
Yes,
Okay, it's called Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. Tell me your thoughts.
man. I love Friends. I think I'm allowed to admit that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it
Uh-huh.
just makes me
That's
laugh.
our demographic. Yes.
Yes, and it's just like his honesty and openness about his struggles with alcohol and drugs, and I really appreciated how open he was. It's a very candid story, and it's jarring. I mean, it makes
Hmm.
me uh, it's so sad for anyone addicted in that
Hmm.
way, and I appreciated how honest and open he was, and what a stronghold drugs and alcohol had on him. And it's
Hmm.
amazing how well he functioned in the midst of it on the
Mm.
show. But such a broken life that talk about looking for life in all the wrong places. And
Hmm.
so it was a quick read, but really jarring.
Yeah, Aaron and I listened to it this summer, and he reads it, and I always enjoy when an author reads a book, especially if it's like a celebrity that you've seen in the
Yes.
world. And I remember coming away from that feeling super sad for him, and also reminded of what a beast addiction is. And
Yes.
for me personally, I haven't struggled with addiction, but know friends that have, and have served in like the county jail, and have talked to women and men who have struggled with addiction. And I mean, you and I were just talking about addiction with food, and just to
Yes.
see like the humanity behind addiction is so often misinterpreted. And so
Yes.
oftentimes, I mean, Matthew Perry has survived and done so well, in my personal opinion, because he has an unlimited fund of resources.
Hmm.
And so then
That's
you
right.
take someone who does not have an unlimited form of resources, and they have a back injury, and then they get addicted to drugs, and they lose their whole life. And a
Yes.
story like that, and how terrible addiction is, it reminds me to look at people with compassion and grace and mercy, as in addiction can steal a lot from people.
That's right. Did you see The Blind yet? The Robertson movie?
No, in fact, Corey sent me a link for it. I just saw in my email, and I haven't seen it. The link probably doesn't work anymore. She's probably like, Jamie, thanks a lot. But I haven't seen it, but I'm dying to see it. Have you seen it?
Yeah, we went last night. I went with my wife and two of my kids and one of a friend, and it was so good, so jarring. Like the addiction side, it's I didn't know that this was such a significant part of Phil's
Oh, I don't know
story.
this either.
Oh, you need to go see it. It was really well done. And what I appreciate is like these Christian movies now are actually showing the depravity and the hurt, and and again, so much compassion
Mm,
for somebody stuck in addiction and a
hmm.
rut. And so I highly recommend it. And they don't hold anything back on the dark side of it, but also the hope we find in
I
Christ.
love that. In fact, when I saw it came out, I looked for it close to a theater near me and couldn't find it. And so I need to look again, because I would love to
Come
go
to
see it.
Waco, come hang in Waco and come see it here.
I'm coming to Waco in the spring. I'll figure
For
out where I'm
what?
going, and I'll tell everyone where I'm going, but I am
Okay.
coming to Waco in the spring. Scott, I'm so grateful for you and your ministry, and I just am a big fan of everything happening at y'all's church and in Waco, and go Bears, sick 'em. I can say
Sick 'em.
that at the same time. In all seriousness, thank you for your love for the church and your family, and being an example of someone leading through humility and vulnerability. And it's very much needed these days. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm so grateful and honored to be on here, Jamie. Grateful for all the work you're doing. And for me, you've held me from a distance for so long. And I'm so thankful for all that you do. And thanks for having me on today. Really, really honored and grateful.
You're kind. Thank you. Hey friends, I hope you love this conversation as much as I did. To make sure that you never miss any of the happy hour conversations, go ahead and hit the subscribe button below to make sure you're notified every time we release a new episode. And if you want more content today, click on those videos over there. I think you're going to like them just as much as you like the one today.